Welcome to Dr. Tiffany Vora and Dr. Casey Huang. Thank you for joining us today for a quick chat on all things biotech, high-tech, Stanford, diversity, all the wonderful topics that you are both so au fait with. But I really need to ask you, can you share how you actually both met? Dr. Tiffany Vora, Dr. Casey, how did you actually meet?
We met at Princeton, where I was a graduate student in the Department of Molecular Biology, and Casey was a postdoctoral researcher there. And he had offered an intersession class that was about coding for biologists. And I was at the point in my PhD research where I had invented this new technology. It was very exciting, and I was horrified to discover I had no way of analyzing all of this data that I had gotten. So I went to Casey's class that he co-taught with another postdoc, hoping to get my coding skills up to snuff. But it turned out he started all the way at the beginning with a variable is, and I had already bludgeoned my way through all that. So I actually cut all of Casey's classes. Okay. But then we met each other again at the end of the class. There was a lab period where we were allowed to bring our own data. So I brought my project in, and he was very helpful.
Excellent. I can tell that he's been very helpful ever since. What were your studies, and how did you find yourself at Princeton?
Yeah, well, actually, being at Princeton was a big life change for me. I'd been trained as a physicist, actually as a theoretical physicist. So I was thinking about how the world worked, but at a totally different level from where we see biology now. And I basically by chance stumbled into a small research project associated with biology. And I was just transformed by how beautiful the living world was and all the opportunities to explain new things in new ways. And so I decided to go to Princeton, move into a biology department, and see if I could find my own little niche in this world. And it turned out to be, one of the most productive times of my life, one of the happiest times of my life, and for me, sort of the rest is history. I never look back.
Wonderful. So talking about physics, I know that you talk a lot, Tiffany, about biology is technology, but I want to leap straight into quantum because it's something that I know that you have both delved into. How do you think quantum is going to actually affect what you both do and where it might take the beauty of biology, the beauty of physics? Where do you think it might lead us?
Well, quantum computing is suited for particular types of computational problems that classical computing isn't actually really great at. So I think about things like drug discovery, protein design. Casey, what are some places where you think quantum might be helpful?
Well, I think it's an example of a bigger set of revolutions that's taking place in science and especially biology. What you see now is that problems that we thought were going to be completely unsolvable 10 years ago are now either solved or people look at them as just on the horizon. It's in the same vein that, we used to think of cancer as this demon that could not be tamed. And this explosion of strategies to tap into our immune system to fight off cancer have really changed the game. They've brought hope, and even more so, they've brought inspiration for thinking about how to tackle many other problems in a similar way. And computing as a whole is exactly that. We met because of computing, and it was because Tiffany was ahead of the game. She realized that biology was a science that was going to rely on data and on ways to transform data with computing. And I think now the rest of the world is coming around to that, but doesn't have the training now to really exploit these tools. And so a lot of what we do is, in different ways, is trying to bring those new technologies to people. And I think quantum computing is yet another level where we really don't have a grasp yet of how it can be deployed in the best ways. But it's very clear, just looking back in history and seeing what's happening in the quantum computing space, that the future may come well before we think.
Yeah, it feels like it's doing that consistently, doesn't it? So how do you do some work together? You're in Australia at the moment. We've got you presenting together. Can you just tell me a little bit more about how you do work together and what the intersection of both your work is?
Well, we're really lucky in that I take a generalist approach to the technology monitoring and technology analysis work that I do from Silicon Valley. Casey is a professor at Stanford, so he's really deep into the research field, his particular research areas. He's a cellular biophysicist, he works on the microbiome, and really if you want to talk to a practitioner who's taking these exponential technologies that we talk about a lot, computation, imaging, robotics, all these various things, and actually uses them to understand how the human body works and how other things like bacteria work, then Casey's able to take us really deep there. So when we give events together, what we do is we integrate ourselves so that I'm giving the broad framing of the perspectives and here are the lessons we can extract. And then Casey takes us in really deep on the day-to-day and what does it actually look like to use these technologies. Another piece that I think is really important for both of us is thinking about how we act as leaders. How do you lead in a time of uncertainty? And Casey and I certainly did not train to use the technologies that we use now as scientists. So he's in an interesting position where he's training the next leadership generation of STEM leaders on technologies that he never actually trained on, which to me is just a metaphor for how everybody is operating these days. I think that's our big contribution. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we're also very lucky because your question of how we work together is probably better phrased as how do we live together because we've managed to create a life where we simply find these questions so exciting that it really captures our imagination, even while we're traveling here in Australia. And I think for me, running a lab at Stanford where we're able to try and push the frontiers of what we know is helped so much by talking with someone like Tiffany, who is trying to figure out how those frontiers integrate with everything else that we know about the world around us, and in particular about the sort of policies and strategies and ethical components of how we move forward in this space.
I love that the zoom out, zoom in approach, and we'll often use that with clients. So like, let's take this big picture and then let's really bring it in to see how we can integrate it into what we're doing in work, in life, etc. Leadership has never been more crucial than it is now. But it's not just leading great organizations, it's leading yourself or leading a family, leading a community, leading on so many levels. And let's not even go to the political arena because there's much to be said about leaders there that we won't go into around this interview. But how are you finding that your work is affecting leaders? I know Tiffany in particular, so it is very much biology is technology with you, and I love the way that you integrate everything in the world around us, and it is the time of convergence where we're pulling in all these different things. So we are pulling in leadership, quantum computing, physics, we're pulling in all types of different fields, climate, etc. How are you finding that convergence? I imagine that it really excites you because you can pull all these bits and pieces in, but how are you finding convergence in the work that you do?
I look to the natural world. So that's where I draw my inspiration, both as a biologist, but also as a leader. I'm working on a book about this right now, actually, because when we look at nature, we have the opportunity to look at nature's 4 billion years of innovation that have happened on this earth. And by nature, I mean biology, because he's the physicist, I'm the biologist. But so what we're able to do then is say, okay, nature's been solving problems for 4 billion years. It's been running experiments. It's been, making the hard choices. We talk about cutting things in, technology companies, but when nature cuts, she cuts hard, right? So we've got this amazing 4 billion year history of life on this planet that has basically looked at every design principle, every way of solving a problem, every way of thinking about a context, looking at various levels of hierarchy. And so I am trying to go around the world encouraging people to say, look, you don't have to make this stuff up out of whole cloth. You don't have to make it up from scratch. Nature has already done a lot of that for us. Here are some tools, some frameworks, some mindsets that you can use to draw inspiration from the world around you.
Anything we can do to create positive leadership at the moment is wonderful. And looking back at nature, you're absolutely correct. It's all those analogies and how nature does eventually look after herself. Casey, what about you? The whole leadership perspective you're leading, as Tiffany said earlier, the next generation of people that will influence a great number of people. How does leadership
I think it's a really interesting and inspirational challenge right now, because as I mentioned, we're living through multiple revolutions in science, from the way we look at data to the way we sequence the human body and the world around us and use that information, the way we image the world around us to really see what is there, even at the microscopic level. And I think the funny aspect of trying to change and train the next generation of leaders is that oftentimes our mindset lags far behind. We feel comfortable with the things that we were trained to think about and to do. And a great example of that is Stanford has been a leader in the area of health. One of the very funny semantic aspects of biomedical research is that it's funded in the US by the National Institutes of Health, but almost everything they do is about disease, how to solve diseases. And that's of course very important if you happen to have one of those diseases. But I would argue that it's equally important that we understand the many people who are healthy, what makes them healthy, what can we do to maintain, improve, and perhaps spread that health more broadly. And so I'm part of an alliance at Stanford that is aiming to do just that. And by switching the mindset, I think it also gives the opportunity to start changing the focus. One of the things that they've emphasized very strongly is that the vast majority of disease research is performed only on men. So we understand very little about what maintains health in women. And so they've been able to bring that to the forefront, which I think hopefully will represent leadership in a different way, trying to spread the way that research should be done to a larger group of people.
And that which brings me to your work in diversity as well. So we had a conversation yesterday that you led around diversity. And so diversity is showing up in that way. What other ways is it showing up at places like Stanford?
I think it's showing up at both at the level of trying to think about who we are collectively, but also who we want to be. What kind of environment do we want everyone to be coexisting and working in? And in many ways, that is even more of a challenge, because again, it forces us to reevaluate and change the mindset of how we have taken care of each other in the community. And it's a very slow process, but it's one that fortunately, I think Stanford and many other places has tried to involve as many people as possible. And so having that diversity of approaches, I think helps to improve diversity as a whole. As the director of the biophysics program, one of the things that's been perhaps my biggest challenge, but also greatest gratification, was trying to take a field which has traditionally not been very diverse and create that sort of community at Stanford. And in about 6 years, we've been able to increase the number of minorities in the program from about 5% to about 30%. And what you can see happen is that that changes the way that people behave. And it's really, I think, stimulated this mentality that the students feel empowered to do the things that they can do for each other and to ask for the help that they need. And so we've really switched from a mindset of the leader trying to impose a structure to we as a community trying to move forward together. And that's been really exciting.
Congratulations, that's a big improvement, 30%. Tiffany, how do you find diversity, like the lessons that you find in nature with diversity, how does that transfer into our human behaviours?
Well, nature thrives with diversity. We call it variation in biology, but basically in a biological system, if everything is the same, if the context switches, then the entire system crashes. So just the way nature is built in to have this diversity so that if, like I said, if something changes, then you've got some resilience, you've got some things here. Nature doesn't optimize. nature is trying to find a good enough response to a solution to keep going, to get to the next generation or the next challenge. And diversity is really the fuel for that. So when I think about diversity, that's what I really think of it as. It's the fuel for evolution, and it's the fuel for innovation.
Fantastic. It's been amazing speaking with you both, and I could actually sit here and talk to you all day, but I'm not sure how that would go down with people trying to watch a small segment of what it is that you do. One final word. So if you had something that you would love to share around any of the topics that we've discussed, so whether it's diversity or quantum or the integration of biology, the convergence, I'm going to give you like a little bit of 5-second breathing space to think about something, which is why I'm using these words to fill. Casey, I might go to you first. What would you like to leave our listeners with?
Sure. Well, actually, I'll leave them with an answer to your question about diversity from the scientific perspective. You know, our bodies are filled with bacteria. And I think the first time people hear about that, they're kind of stunned to think of themselves as much bacteria as human. In many ways, though, that's the wrong way to think of it. We are almost all bacteria. For instance, we often say, you know, we are what we eat, but there are not very many things we can eat. So our body encodes the capability to digest sugars and carbohydrates with about 20 enzymes. And the bacteria in our body encode about 100,000 of those. And so thankfully, every time we go out to a fancy meal, we are relying on our bacterial friends for so much. And the diversity that Tiffany is talking about is a diversity that isn't just so that, you know, we can go out and have a fancy meal, but when we lose that diversity, we see that, for instance, cancer patients have worse outcomes. We see that it leads to a lot of the so-called Western diseases, allergies, IBD, Crohn's disease. And so it's really, I think, inspirational to think about the diversity that always has been there in nature, and think about how can we use an engineering approach to try and restore more of that health to we as humans.
Thank you. I'm now inspired to think of myself as one giant bacteria walking machine. Thank you. Tiffany?
Well, so for me, it's all about this idea that if the 20th century was the computer age, the 21st century is going to be the biology age. You keep reminding me of my tagline that biology is technology, and it's absolutely true. These technologies that we're setting the stage for now are going to be hitting everything from health to food, to space, to materials, to all kinds of things. And especially as we start living much longer, healthier lives and start living off Earth and these various other pieces, we have the chance to build this partnership with life on Earth in a way that it really empowers us not to just survive the coming challenges due to climate change, but to really thrive everywhere we are and to be the best humans and the best ancestors that we can be.
I love that. It's a beautiful, beautiful phrase to finish on. Dr. Tiffany Vora, Dr. Huang, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been very inspirational.
Thank you.
Thank you.